One of the world's top counterinsurgency experts, former Australian Army officer David Kilcullen, now a consultant to NATO forces in Afghanistan, in regular dialogue there with US General Petraeus, warned last month that the Taliban was already lining up people to be killed whose names had been revealed in the WikiLeaks papers. David Kilcullen flew into Sydney today, direct from Kandahar, and I spoke with him late this afternoon about the impact of the WikiLeaks revelations and also about his now upbeat assessment on the war in Afghanistan. David Kilcullen, the WikiLeaks saga continues. You said more than a month ago that the Taliban in Afghanistan had claimed to have compiled a list of people from WikiLeaks that they were going to kill. Has anything happened on the ground to that effect, or was the Taliban playing with people's heads?
Well, that's right. Haji Zakir, who's one of their elders, came out and said that they had a list of about 1,200 people based on the cables from the Afghan leaks, and said that those people were now going to be hunted down. There's certainly been a lot of violence in that part of the country, but it's very hard to tell whether anything's actually happened to those people or not. So it's a little bit up in the air at the moment, I'd suggest.
Any obvious repercussions of any kind in Afghanistan or Pakistan out of the WikiLeaks disclosures?
Well, obviously political repercussions. A lot of anger and concern coming out of key partners in the Afghan government, and also the Pakistani military have been fairly upset about some of the revelations, particularly this last lot of diplomatic revelations and the earlier ones about Afghanistan. So, yeah, political more than military, I would suggest, at the moment.
But are they things that disturb you? Because you might understand that at another level there are people who see it as a refreshing kind of expose of what's really going on and what's really being said behind the scenes.
Yeah, look, I'm quite sympathetic to that point of view. I think that a lot of the value of free speech and public discussion is enabled by, free access to what people are actually thinking. My concern when I was speaking about this about a month ago was for local people who are left unprotected, and if named in a secret document and that document's then released, they can be targeted. I mean, they're living in a village where the Taliban can come around at night and, they do Google people and they do check on the internet. So I think WikiLeaks have subsequently redacted some of the names and other lists, and I think that's a responsible approach.
We read in the New York Times that a year-end White House review of American strategy in Afghanistan is expected to declare progress in the war. Well, I guess you'd almost expect them to say that. And that the US surge has expanded security in the south and around Kabul. Is that progress clear to you? Because you've just been on the ground again there.
Yeah, look, I actually am the most positive that I've ever been about military progress on the ground in Afghanistan. As you say, I was just in Kandahar until yesterday and spent a bit of time in Kabul also. Both the south and the capital area of the country are probably the most secure that I've seen them for a while. The issue is not so much that, though. I think we've made some significant military progress. It's now about translating that into improvements on things like corruption and Afghan government performance. The military stuff's essential. If you don't get it right, it doesn't really matter how good your other parts of your policy are. So it's a great step forward, but now what we've got to do is consolidate that and turn it into something real.
General Petraeus has made no secret of the fact that he is targeting and is putting a strong focus on the corruption element. How is he doing that? How is he putting that into effect, and is he having an impact?
Well, I think he's starting to have a bit of an impact. The most important new development is the creation of a new task force called Task Force Shafafiyat under H.R. McMaster, who some people may remember was one of General Petraeus' closest partners in Iraq and has a lot of experience on the ground doing successful counterinsurgency in other parts of the world. His task force is an interagency group. It has different whole-of-government components to it, and it's working hard to examine the corruption issue. There's also a lot of work being done by the embassy and other parts of ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force. So I think we're seeing improved effort in anti-corruption. But, of course, it takes two to fix the corruption problem, and we need to see a partnering effort from the Afghan government on that side.
And are you?
Well, Afghan officials aren't all corrupt. I mean, I've worked with a lot of very capable and dedicated officials. There are a lot of people in certain parts of the Afghan government, like the Ministry for Rural Reconstruction and Development and the Independent Directorate of Local Government, that have done some very good work in government accountability in the last 12 months. But it's more of a sort of general pattern of behaviour of elites across Afghanistan, both within the government and outside the government, extracting things from the population, and with the abuse that results from that is what creates the problems with the Taliban. So I think it's a broader spectrum kind of a problem.
You see the decision at the NATO summit in Lisbon recently as having been enormously significant in extending the timeline of commitment in Afghanistan to 2014. How significant?
Very significant. One of the problems that we've just been talking about in respect to governance and corruption has been that a lot of Afghans interpreted President Obama's speech of December last year as saying that all the foreigners are going to be out sometime in 2011. And so it was very hard to get people to take action on things like corruption and governance if they thought that we're all leaving. But what happened in Lisbon was that the Afghan government and the partner nations all agreed on a timeline from now to the end of 2014 for full transfer to the Afghans. And that basically bumps the commitment out by at least another 3 years. And there have been subsequent statements by officials of both governments that even the 2014 deadline is a deadline for handing over to the Afghans, not a timeline for the international community to withdraw. I'm not sure that that's actually filtered through to Afghans yet. In fact, I'm pretty sure a lot of Australians and Americans haven't picked up on the change. Some people in America are still talking about 2011 as if it's the critical time. But I do think that it does add substantially more opportunity for us to get things done. It's still going to be an extremely difficult challenge, but I think it was near impossible to expect the sorts of changes that we want by the middle of next summer. At least this gives us another few years to get things done.
So looking at next year, specifically now, how do you see next year unfolding? What do you expect out of next year?
I think the critical time next year will be between May and August, and it will be in central Helmand and Kandahar, which is the south and southwest of the country. I think the Taliban have a significant credibility problem coming. They told the population that we're all leaving in 2011. The Taliban was one of those audience groups that interpreted the president's speech that way. They've been pushing a policy of basically saying to the population, you can work with the international community, but they're leaving and we'll still be here. So ultimately, you've got to come with us. And that's going to be shown to be false when it gets to July 2011 next year and we don't leave. I also think the Taliban are suffering such significant damage in Kandahar and Helmand that they are going to have to push back. They'll either have to accept defeat and roll over, which isn't their style, or they're going to have to push back. And so I think Kandahar, possibly Uruzgan, where the Australians are, and across into Helmand, central Helmand and southern Helmand, we're going to see some pretty significant fighting next year.
And that could mean more casualties?
It will certainly mean more casualties.
And that could mean more political impact back in the home countries?
Yeah, I think that given the commitment that's been made at Lisbon, the capital level, the elite level of political buy-in is there for the Afghan mission. The question is whether publics and people that are watching this as ordinary members of the voting public are going to continue to support the effort. I don't think we know the answer to that yet.
And yet it sounds to me like at that military level and even the counterinsurgency effort behind it, you're sounding somewhat more optimistic than I've heard you sound in the past.
I am actually more sort of glass half full than I've been at any time in the past. This is the best military trend line that I've seen for a while. But I would just caution you by saying it's very, very important to get the military piece right. And we haven't done that very much in the past. So it's a big step forward that we're starting to improve. But that's only the first 20% of the problem. You've then got to do all the other hard work on government reform, civil society development, the dealing with corruption. And that's the part that I think we are going to struggle with, perhaps even more than the military piece.
David Kilcullen, thanks for talking with us.
Thanks, Gary.
And David Kilcullen was in Sydney for a civil-military interaction seminar.